Hi, I'm Steve. So, my 18th birthday should have been a big deal, right? But instead of celebrating, my family kicked me out. No warning, no talk, just, Steve, you're 18 now, time to be on your own. And that was it. I was in shock, carrying my few things in a duffel bag with nowhere to go. I started couch surfing, staying with friends but trying not to overstay. But after a while, I had nowhere to go and ended up sleeping in my car, using the back seat as my bed. One night, I called my brother Dan, hoping my family might help. I asked if I could stay with him for a bit until I got back on my feet. He just laughed and said, "Come on, Steve, get it together. You're like a homeless bum now." His wife added, "Yeah, Steve, maybe try not being a loser." Their words hurt. I realized they didn't care and were even mocking me. I was truly on my own. Over the next few weeks, I moved from place to place, trying to survive. Being homeless was tough. Finding somewhere safe to sleep, dealing with hunger, and living with constant uncertainty wore me down. But something inside me refused to give up. I scraped together enough money for a gym membership, so I could take regular showers, and kept applying for jobs until I finally got one in retail. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I showed up on time, no matter where I had slept the night before, and saved every penny I could. This part of my life was really tough, but I kept going. But it also showed me how much I could handle. Every day felt like a fight, not just against the tough conditions, but against the sadness that came from being abandoned by the people who were supposed to care about me. Still, I was surviving, driven by the need to prove to them, and to myself, that I mattered, that I could make it on my own. Getting that retail job felt like a breakthrough. It wasn't fancy or high-paying, but it was a paycheck and gave me a bit of stability. I saved every dollar I could, sometimes skipping meals just to afford the deposit on a condo I'd share with a roommate for a few months. Life started to feel a bit more normal, or at least my version of it. We split the bills, and I finally had a real roof over my head and a kitchen where I could cook. It felt like a small piece of paradise. But just when things were starting to go right, everything changed. The pandemic hit, and businesses started to shut down. My retail store closed, and my roommate lost his job too. We couldn't pay rent. And soon I was back at square one, no home, no job, and living in my truck again. This time, I set up a small camper on the back. It was cramped and cold, but at least it was mine. Hoping that maybe family meant something, I reached out to them again, just asking for a place to park my camper and stay safe. I called my mom, feeling a mix of hope and desperation. "Mom, can I park my camper at the house for a while, just until I figure things out?" There was a long pause before she finally answered. Her voice cold and distant. "Steve, we have to be practical. If you want to park here, you need to pay rent. And not just any rent, market rate." Market rate? For parking in their driveway? It was ridiculous, but there was no room for negotiation, no warmth, no family support, just business. I couldn't believe it. "Seriously, I'm struggling here, and that's your answer?" "That's the way it has to be, Steve. We all have our burdens." I hung up the phone, feeling the sting of rejection even sharper because it was masked as practicality. With nowhere else to go, I stayed in my truck, parking in the far corners of supermarket lots, using public restrooms, and trying to stay out of sight. Days blurred into nights, and each sunrise was a reminder of my situation, without a home, but still holding on to hope. At that point, survival wasn't just about finding food or staying warm, it was about keeping my dignity and the will to keep going. I refused to break or go back to my family, begging for help, only to be turned away again. So, I focused on what I could control. I kept applying for jobs, cleaned and organized my camper, and reminded myself that this wasn't the end of my story, just a tough chapter. Living out of my camper, every day was about survival, but I kept pushing forward, sending out resumes to any job I could find. Finally, I caught a break, a warehouse job in a nearby city. It wasn't close, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was a chance. That was all I needed. I drove my truck to the new job, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. The work was hard, long hours on my feet, moving boxes and handling shipments, but it was mine. I worked up the courage to ask my boss, Mr. Thompson, a gruff but fair man, if I could park my camper in the company lot temporarily, just until I could get back on my feet. He looked at me thoughtfully and asked, "You planning to stick around, Steve?" "Absolutely, I'm here to work," I replied, my determination clear. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly and agreed. "All right, you can plug into our power for the camper. Just make sure you're not in anyone's way. That small favor, access to power and water, was everything. It gave me a little dignity, allowing me to have lights at night and a warm place to sleep. I threw myself into the work, arriving early, staying late, and always volunteering for extra shifts. My hard work didn't go unnoticed. 6 months in, Mr. Thompson called me into his office. "Steve, I've seen your work ethic. It's impressive. How would you feel about moving up to a supervisor position?" That promotion was a lifeline. It came with a significant raise, and suddenly, life wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about building something. I saved every extra dollar, cut back on everything except the essentials, and started looking for a place more permanent than the back of my camper. A year later, I had saved enough for a down payment on a manufactured home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was real, and it was mine. A 3-bedroom place in a quiet community, where no one knew about my past struggles. When I got the keys, the weight of the last few years seemed to lift. Standing in the empty living room of my new home, I realized this was more than just a house, it was a symbol of everything I had overcome. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of rejection and hardship. Proud and a little overwhelmed, I shared the news on social media with a photo of me holding the keys in front of my new home. "From living in my truck to this, never give up," I wrote. I had no idea that post would bring my past crashing back into my life, threatening the peace I had fought so hard to create. The buzz from the post was still fresh when the past came knocking, literally. I was unpacking kitchen supplies when a knock rattled my front door. Expecting maybe a friendly neighbor, I opened it, only to find Dan and his family standing there, grinning too widely as their eyes scanned my home. "Hey, Steve, saw your post. Nice place you've got here," Dan said, stepping inside without an invitation. His wife and kids followed, their eyes hungry as they looked around. "Dan, what are you doing here?" I asked, gripping the box tighter. "Well," Dan started, his tone way too casual, "we were thinking, since you've got all this space and it's just you living here, why don't we move in? You won't even notice us." I stared at him, disbelief and anger rising. "What? No, Dan, this is my home." That's when Dan pulled out a stack of papers, waving them in front of me. "We even drew up some rental agreements. You can stay in your camper, it's what you're used to, right?" I took the papers, my heart pounding as I skimmed through the absurd terms and signatures that clearly weren't mine. "These are fake, Dan. I didn't sign this. You can't just move into my house." When he saw I wasn't backing down, Dan's friendly facade slipped, his voice turned sharp. "Look, Steve, don't make this difficult. We're family." That's when I made my decision. "Get out of my house, Dan, now." They didn't budge, until I pulled out my phone and started dialing the police. It was surreal, watching them sit in my living room like they belonged, while I stood there feeling like the outsider in my own home. When the officers arrived, it didn't take long to assess the situation, the fake rental agreements, the tampered locks. It was clear who was in the wrong. "Sir, you'll need to leave the premises now," one officer told Dan as they began ushering him and his family out. Dan protested, but there was no argument to make. The truth was too obvious. As the door closed behind them, a deep quiet settled over the house. For the first time, I was truly alone, but this time, it was in a place that was undeniably mine. I arranged for the locks to be changed and planned for additional security, but the message was clear. I wasn't the vulnerable kid they once knew. This home was my fortress, my achievement, and no one could take that from me. After the confrontation, the silence in my home felt more like a victory than ever. It wasn't just about having a roof over my head, it was about claiming my space, asserting my right to the life I had built on my own terms. In the quiet aftermath, I picked up my phone and did what had started this whole drama. I went to social media, but this time, I shared the full story. I posted about Dan and his family's uninvited arrival, the fake rental agreements, and how they'd tried to take over my home. I wrote about calling the police and standing up to the years of manipulation I had endured. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even extended family members, all appalled by Dan's actions. Many shared their own stories of overcoming toxic relationships, creating a tapestry of resilience that went far beyond my own experience. The backlash against my immediate family was swift and severe. Relatives who had once stayed silent during my struggles now openly condemned their actions. The irony was unmistakable as Dan and my parents were gradually pushed to the fringes of family gatherings and group chats. Years of indifference and cruelty had finally caught up with them, and their social isolation was both fitting and long overdue. In the outpouring of support and shared stories from others, I found a sense of community like I had never known before. It strengthened my resolve to cut ties completely with Dan and the rest of my immediate family. I blocked their numbers, removed them from social media, and severed the last connections that had only ever brought me pain. Standing in my living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey, from the rejection I faced on my 18th birthday to this very moment, had been filled with challenges, but each one had taught me about my own strength. I had learned to trust in my ability to survive, to thrive, and to build a life on my terms, free from the expectations and manipulations of others. Looking ahead, I saw a future full of possibilities. I was no longer bound by the weight of family expectations. I was free to pursue happiness on my own terms, with dreams to chase, places to explore, and a newfound sense of self that was no longer tied to those who had never appreciated it. As the sun set, bathing my home in a warm golden light, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. For the first time, I was in control of my life, ready for whatever challenges might come. With every obstacle I had faced, I had built a foundation of independence and self-respect that no one could take from me. Surrounded by a community I had created and the peace I had fought so hard to achieve, I was truly home. As Steve's journey comes to a close, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Is it always necessary to maintain family ties, even when they bring toxicity into your life? Or is it healthier, at times, to cut them off completely? This is a deep and complex issue when it comes to family and personal well-being, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, experiences, or advice in the comments below. Your insights not only help build this community, but can also provide support to others who might be in similar situations. If Steve's story moved you or resonated in any way, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more stories that challenge, inspire, and entertain. Your support allows us to continue sharing these narratives. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to reading your comments.